let's look at Chapter 7, Governing and Administering Public Education. So for this chapter, we have 5 objectives. We're going to look at the local school board, the intermediate units, state government, federal government, and then slightly compare non-public and public schools. So first, think about, what do you know about your educational leaders, your local leaders, your state leaders? Like, just start thinking, brainstorming, what do you already know? And then let's compare to what the book has to say about them. So the first one, local responsibilities and activities. There are local school boards. So these people are elected or appointed. They are volunteers. Now, according to 2010 data, and this is a link if you want to read the article, or actually it's a whole paper, they're typically not educators. They're mostly white males between 40 and 59, and they may or may not have children in the school where they're on the board for. So again, this is from 2010. There'll probably be data again after the census in 2020. So their responsibilities are looking at policies, staffing, right? So we have the picture of the boardroom. We see them making or having meetings and voting on things. They're employee relations, they look at the money. They do focus on students, or they can. They look at the curriculum, what types of curriculum are going to be taught, assessments sometimes, community relations, and intergovernmental requirements. And then the superintendent. So the superintendent, they are managing the professional and non-teaching personnel. They are providing leadership in curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and then they do the managing of the administrative side. Depending on how large, right, the district or the board is, then there could be a central office where they have supervisors and specialists. So Kern County is large. It does have multiple pieces. Then at the individual schools, we have principals. So these are responsible for school operations. They go to lots of meetings. They have lots of paperwork, phone calls, community relations. So they're the connection between all of these entities for the school, individual schools. And of course, parents and communities, right? Those are involved as well. Sometimes. So when parents are involved, there are higher test scores, lower absenteeism, meaning students actually go to school, improved behavior, both at home and at school, higher motivation to study for the students. So parent involvement is crucial. And then sometimes if the parents are not around, there could be community participation or family participation. There's also charter schools, and this is where the community controls what's being taught in a sense. And then community schools as well. So now, recently there's been a push for consolidation. So let's look at what that means. That means combining small districts. Well, according to research, in 1987, research said there should be about 100 students per grade level, or about 250. Other research said learning is most efficient or effective at 600 to 900 students. Okay, so those are actually still considered smaller districts. Now, consolidation says we should combine all of those because it's more efficient. Economic and serve-wise, it's more efficient, so let's combine them. But according to research, it says, well, learning isn't effective if you do that. So it's kind of this, right, pros and cons to look at. Some of the largest districts, over 47,000 students they're focusing on. That's what consolidation is doing. And then the largest is in New York City with over 1 million. Second largest, at least when this book was published, was LA Unified with over 600,000 students. And so they have one board, one district, looking over all those hundreds of thousands of students. Or in New York's case, 1 million students. So sometimes there's these intermediate units. They are like the middle person between the state and local districts. And so a question for you is, does California have these? Right, and I'm not going to tell you the answer because I want you to look it up a little bit. And then I'll share the answer in an announcement. So state responsibilities, because we looked at local, now let's look at the state. So the state, they enact school legislation. They figure out the state taxes and how much financially they're going to give each of the local districts. They set the minimum standards for training, credentialing, all of that. They also develop state curriculum standards. They establish assessment requirements. They provide accreditation for schools. And they provide some supports like student transportation and textbooks. The governor has veto power, as you can tell by the image, but they appoint the state board of education. They appoint or remove people at the state level, so all these people who are making state decisions that are actually all the regulations local people have to pay attention to, those are made by the governor. And they determine the budget for all of these things. The state legislature, they establish and maintain these public schools, they enact laws, they levy taxes, they determine all the basics of teaching and instruction. Who can be taught, what can be taught, how many years must they be taught, how long do students have to go to school per day, per year, all of the testing, all of the assessment, even school construction, how often schools can be constructed, right? How the format of the schools, that's all from the state. And the governor appoints all the boards, all the people on the board. There's also people we elect for our state legislature. They're determining other things. So who's being elected, even locally and statewide, and for the governor, have direct effects, direct impacts on what is being taught and the requirements for our students. Here's a typical structure, right? Governor, courts, legislature. So we have the three prongs of the government, which mirrors what we have at the federal level. And then it's kind of just this top-down approach. Straight from these three state prongs down through how many levels until the local school boards. And then finally it gets dispersed even further along the lines to teachers and the students. So the Board of Education, the one that gets appointed by our governor, they set all the standards. They set the high school graduation. They set the credentialing requirements. They set the accountability and assessment procedures. They set accreditation policies. They set everything. They certify the teachers. They give apportionment funds. They are the ones that are conducting the research for everything. Right? The state school board has a lot of control over what's happening in our state. Whatever the federal government doesn't have control over, right? That's one of the amendments the state has control over. Then you have your chief state school officer. This is either a superintendent or commissioner of education, depending on the state. So again, check out California and see what we have. And I'm asking you to do this because I want you to look up these things, because that's part of being an informed citizen, as well as being someone who can find information and encourage your students or provide opportunities for your students to look up information. And so again, these people are either elected or appointed, and they are kind of the person in control of a lot of issues that are around education. So now let's look at the federal role. So we have the U.S. Department of Education. They are in control of funds, contracting. They look over education, school districts, college, universities. They also look at innovation and research. And they have different clearinghouses for services related to education. That means like data warehouses or places that you can get information and data. And the next chapter, like I said, is going to be on funding. So we'll look at the percentages for each group on funding next week. So that's public schools. How does that compare to non-public? Well, right, we talked about charter a little bit, but you have public and private schools. So public, they still have to follow state laws according to health, building codes, child welfare, student codes, and they have to have a board. Other than that, you notice curriculum necessarily isn't there. They do need to be accredited, things like that. Let's if you look at this long list, you can see different types of accreditations for different charter schools, private schools. EDUC is a good source. So all of these optional online materials, I know there's a lot, but they give different information on what's required at the local, state levels, even national levels, and also what about the charter and private schools. So we have different ways those work as well that you're welcome to look at in the optional online materials.